All right. Good evening, everyone. I think number of people joining are increasing, and we will be start in 1 minute. So I hope everyone has already prepared your popcorn because we are going to listen a very nice story from Sam about the employer branding. All right, so good evening, everyone. So we are going to start now for the session. So first of all, thank you very much for the great time today. So basically, thanks so much also for Mbak Meti from the Indonesia Institute, Capital Institute Market. Sorry, I've kind of forgot from TICMI, basically. So thank you very much from Mbak Meti for supporting OneHR Indonesia for all the session. I think it has been a lot of sessions supported by TICMI, the Indonesia Capital Market Institute. So tonight we are going to have a sharing session from Sam. So we are going to hear more about the there is a millennial and maybe there is, I don't think there is coronial here, corona millennial generation here. So let me also share with you that OneHR is actually one of the biggest HR community in Indonesia. Yeah, they approximately have more than 1,200 members in here. So they do online sharing every week. So we should say thanks to COVID because actually in the past, the way they do learning sharing more to the offline. But now when we do online, actually the number of people can join is higher than the offline one. Then it can reach out to the people across cities in Indonesia, and maybe like tonight, there are people coming from the other country as well, right? So to start the session, I'm going to share with you a very interesting video before we start the session with Sam. So let me play the video for this. Can you see the video? Okay, let me play the video for this.
Why do I love Dropbox? Boy, I mean, if you've got a few hours, I can go over it.
So why do I love Dropbox?
Why do I love Dropbox?
Why do I love Dropbox?
That's a really difficult question.
Gotta be the people.
The people.
The people.
There's not a bad apple in the whole building.
Dropbox is, everyone's positive. I feel like every time I come to work, it's just extremely positive.
I think it's a very human place, if that makes sense.
The culture at Dropbox is down to earth and magical. Lots of dedication, hard work, paired with a lot of fun at the same time.
It's also a culture where people want to deliver on results, but they also never take themselves too seriously.
Dropbox is respectful of my time, not only here at work, but also at home.
There is a seamless integration between your life and your work.
It's just such a diverse group of people, and everyone comes together to create this all-star team.
I'm always surprised here at Dropbox.
There's a lot of talk at Dropbox about how great our perks are.
My very favorite perk at Dropbox is the tea and scones cart. You're just sitting there writing code and all of a sudden this cart comes by your desk.
The gym is great. It's awesome. I really enjoy the gym and being able to work out and then pump iron.
There's a music room at the office, so I spend a bunch of time there, late nights, playing guitar with folks from work.
The one thing that really attracted me to come to Dropbox was this belief that users really own their data.
It's not uncommon that I'm walking around and I have a Dropbox t-shirt on and somebody will stop me on the street and be like, I love what you build. And I love that. I just love knowing that what I'm building has so much impact on so many users.
One day Dropbox will be such an iconic name that I will look back and be so proud of myself for being a part of the journey.
It all goes back to empowerment and initiative. These things are just core to who we are and the kind of people we hire.
It's not only a place where I come to work, it's a place that I come to grow.
Oh my God, I love Dropbox. Is this interview over now? Okay, thanks.
This is Zen.
Discussion, right? We are not going to have you are not going to present something for a one-way presentation. So let me try to ask you questions. Hopefully, then we can get more insight from you. The first question, and I think this is the most essential questions, right? So what is actually employer branding and why company needs the employer branding? Or is it just a product from the consultant to create more revenue?
I like that. I like that. It's all of the above.
I mean, every company already has their own brand. They have their own product. And why do we need, again, the employer branding?
Okay, so maybe I'll start with branding first before I go to employer branding, right? So branding essentially is something like your reputation, right? You know, what are you known for? What do people say or think about you? especially when you're not around. So for example, if I think of Benny, for example, I think of a very helpful guy, a very fun guy. I think of Danny, I think of a very intellectual guy, somebody who's very helpful, for example. So what is the brand, right? I think from an employer branding perspective is, how do people think of your company brand, both internally and externally? So that's the first part in terms of brand itself. Of course, within the brand itself, what's more important is what we call the employee value proposition, the EVP in short, which essentially, given the big title, the big term itself, it actually just means that it's the promise. What is your brand promising people if they decide to trust you as an employee to join your company? So if you ask me what is the employer brand, I mean, keep it short, is really what people think or say about you, and what is the promise that comes with that brand so that it's so attractive that I want to join your company. So for example, why do people want to join the likes of Google, right? I mean, that's one of the most popular companies around the world, because they have shown that, you know, they have first and foremost good perks, right? I guess that's the first thing people think of. They have very progressive, from HR point of view, HR practices. They have the very top-notch, you know, technology. They have a big mission and vision to change the world using data and making sense of information, for example. So that's what they stand for example. And people resonate with what the brand is all about in terms of what it promises, in terms of what it stands for based on what people say and what they think of it. So essentially as simple as that, right? What employer brand is, that is what employer brand is all about. And to Benny's second question, why do we need employer brand? Okay, I think there are multiple aspects that we can think about this, right? So first and foremost, from a recruitment perspective, externally, right? We know that we are not the only company in the market. I'm pretty sure now, out of the, let's see, about 70 people over here, easily, right? We have at least 50 to 60 companies, I'm guessing, if you're not colleagues in any way, easily. So this means, right, that if I'm hiring, let's say, an accountant, for instance, it could be 50 people fighting for one good accountant, right? So how do you then stand out? How do you stand out in a way where, let's say, if I'm applying for the job, I would think of you as the top of my mind. I have 50 people, 50 companies. I'll put you at the top 3, for example. That is branding, right? If you have a strong brand that people resonate with, you have something that touches people's heart, something that connects with people, not just at a rational level, but also at emotional level. I think that's where it's very powerful to get people on the top of mind. And that's what really a powerful brand is all about. It keeps you at top of mind, whether or not you're looking for something. And when you're looking for something, let's say I'm looking for a job, or if I'm looking to refer somebody, I think of this company straight away. So that is why employer branding is so important and so powerful, whether or not you're hiring at this moment. Then of course, from an internal point of view, right, it also creates internal engagement, right? So I think one of the misconceptions that we have in the market is that employer branding equals to digital marketing, equals to just for hiring, right? I think most people, a lot of people or consultants might come to you and tell you that, hey, it's about digital marketing, let's spend on social media, let's get a media buy, let's create content, blah, 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 right? But they forget about the other equation, which HR people are definitely familiar with, right? With a strong brand, internal employees are very well impacted as well. What do I mean? So imagine this, right? If I work for example, the likes of, let's say, Oyo, for example, like Benny, for instance, right? You know, do I feel proud about the company? Do I feel proud about the brand? What do people say about my company from outside, from inside? What does the company say? Do I resonate with it? Do I feel what the company is saying? Do I respect, you know, what my CEO is saying, for example? All this creates the engagement, creates a sense of pride, and especially, right, in such times where things are not as fantastic as we expected it to be as compared last year, if you have a strong brand that creates the engagement, right, it actually also builds loyalty. I think loyalty is one big part that most people don't think of in good times because people have options. But in bad times, if you create a strong brand that people can be proud of, people feel like they're part of, right? Imagine how would they respond when things turn for the better? The loyalty level will grow tremendously, and your retention rate actually, right, will actually grow from there as well. So that's hopefully gives you a good sense of, you know, to Benny's question, what is employer branding and why actually do we actually think of employer branding itself? Yeah.
Okay. So it's actually, when we talk about employer branding, so it's like inside out. Is it correct?
You're right. Absolutely right.
Something from inside to tell the world that this is what the company has, and this is what will the benefit that you will get if you join with us, right? So it's kind of actually more to selling the company a good thing from the company, not only from the reward side, but then also the environment, and so on. Is it?
I would say it's a combination of, so Benny, you're right. I would say in a way it's selling. So basically you're trying to sell both your external candidates in terms of why should you join us and what's in it for them. And internally, why should you continue to stay with us and why should you be proud of us, right? I think that's the first thing we talk about from an employer branding point of view. So Benny also mentioned, right, it's not just about the perks. I think perks are typically more from a very initial, more like a hygiene factor. People look at it, wow, it's nice, easy shout out. But I think what's more valuable typically that people resonate with, that people usually hang on, is actually the intangible things. For example, the emotional connection. For example, why do certain people resonate with insurance companies? For the very fact, it could be because their family members suffered from some illness previously, an insurance agent from somewhere made a difference, and that's where they feel that, hey, this industry or this company in particular resonates with me, right? And there's a strong purpose in it. So the emotional connection part is something that's very powerful that we need to think about beyond the perks and how we connect emotional level, which is something to talk about later, storytelling itself. So I want to think about from the tangible and intangible to connect with people. It's not only about selling, but more important, how do you connect with them at different levels so that they believe in your brand? They want to advocate your brand, right? Whether or not they get the job, they say good things about your brand for you. So that's something that you want to think about from an employer branding point of view.
Nice. Okay. By the way, if you have anything that you want to share during explain or answer my question, feel free to do that, right?
Sure.
Okay. So my next question, I think we got the introduction on about what is employer branding itself, and why we need that. How do we begin the employer branding in our company, and what kind of factors that you think we have to consider when we plan to implement that our employer branding?
I would say, Benny mentioned a very important tagline I use all the time, inside out, right? So typically I use this inside out approach, which I think is very important. Most consultants or most digital marketing firms that say they're doing employer branding, what they focus on is then, how can I create more exposure for you? How can I create more clicks? How can I create more leads? How can I create more followers? That's a typical metric that you'll see from a digital marketing or employer branding firm per se. That's what you typically see. But if you want to start on the true blue employer branding journey itself, which of course is inside out that I mentioned and Benny highlighted as well, start from assessing internally, right? What do your people resonate with? What are your people saying about your company? Which starts with something like an audit. It can be in the form of a survey, which you guys, I believe, do, employee engagement surveys, for example, pulse surveys, or even focus groups, right? So for example, when I start an employer branding project, the first thing I do, right, is always talking to the employees. Talking to employees in terms of different groups of employees. It can be new hires. Why did they join the company? It can be the long service award people who have been there for 20, 30 years, for example. Why did they stay in the company for so long? It can be the middle managers, what do they believe in? How are they leading? What's the leadership style? It can be senior management in terms of what's the direction, for example. So you want to kind of first and foremost understand from inside, right? Different groups of people, what are they saying about your company? It can be good, it can be bad. I mean, I'm not expecting everything to be a bed of roses, to be perfect, or everything to be so bad, right? But what's important is this. Think of what are the strengths. So for example, they say, oh, we feel that the family culture is very strong. This is for family business that I work with in Indonesia in particular. Family culture is strong. There's very good friendship, things like that. So these are some strengths that you want to think about and build on that, right? Because that's something that you can shout out very easily, and something that, if you tell people we are good at this, when they come in, they get, whatever you tell them basically. So there's no misalignment. That's very important. And from the other part, which is the gaps, for example, say, oh, in terms of the company itself, perhaps people work in silo. It has perhaps, some disengagement between the senior management and the working level. These gaps are things that you don't have to present externally at this moment, but find ways to close the gap. I think that's what we're trying to do. So employer branding journey itself, right? It's not just about telling people who you are, but it's also about a journey that fixes the internal engagement. It's also about a journey to get your employees together with you to build something that everyone, right, all of us can be proud of. So that's the very, very first step, right? Before you talk about what's my brand, what's the value proposition, what kind of tools can I do, what kind of budget can I set aside, or what kind of activities can I do? First and foremost, understand internally first what your employees are saying versus where your management wants to go, and then that will give you a good sense how can you align what we call the employee value proposition for a start, right? Very often, this is a fact. Very often, management will tell you, we want to become a company that is, people first, and for example, we want to have the most progressive package or whatever, blah blah blah, right? Then the people will tell you something else, that I actually don't think our benefits are that good. I think it's okay, but what I like is really the flexibility. What I like is the culture where everybody's so young and so energetic, for example. So that's where you want to create alignment. What's your strength? Where are we getting towards? And then use that toolkit of sort to start building your employee value proposition. So that's really the very first step in terms of what we can do if we want to get started on an employee branding journey. Yeah.
I see. So it means like, if I may like a bit summarize from this conversation, if we want to start implement the employer branding, first we need to understand ourselves first, right? Internally, right?
Definitely.
Where are we? How big is the sense of pride and belonging of our existing employee, right? And then also to find out the gap about the retention and also about the employee engagement, what makes them engaged. And from that point, after we all fix those things, I mean, not only totally fix, but then along the way we improve, we started implement and then improve, then you can start do the external activities to share about this as part of the employer branding activities, where it can be done in various ways. That's what I got from this conversation.
Pretty much. So maybe if I can just quickly add on as well. So it's not just about bringing that proposition externally. We also want to use that employer brand, that proposition that we have, to constantly communicate internally. So actually, employer branding has the element of employee communications. There is an element of employee engagement as well. I think as a HR practitioner, right? I mean, I used to be from HR for 7 years or so before I became a consultant and a media person. The thing I like about HR and the challenge of HR is that, our employee life cycle, right? Recruitment, engagement, performance management to offboarding even, all of this so interconnected. I think that's the beauty of HR and the challenge for all of us HR practitioners, that, sometimes it's so difficult to solve a problem because it's so interconnected. But then again, if we can do one thing well, it actually trickles to the rest as well. So likewise for employer branding, I think it's not just for external, even though that's kind of typically the primary focus. It's even more important, at least as important, to kind of engage your people internally using this brand to create, like I said, the sense of pride, the loyalty itself. And all these are important because, to one point I haven't quite mentioned, the alignment, right? So why do I say that it's important to first look inward? Because when you first look inward, you know what is true about a situation inside. You can then paint a picture that is real, right? I think the last thing you want is, okay, you tell people that your company is at this level. When they come in, it's here, right? So what happens is the gap creates what we call frustration, right? Expectation, reality, in between the gap is frustration. Why do people leave company within 3 months, 6 months, 1 year? Because of their frustration. They come in with a promise that I'll get A, B, C, but I only get A, or worse, I get nothing, and I get negative C, D, E, for example. And that's where people get really frustrated about things, and hence you see high turnover because of that. So it all starts from what kind of message do I put out outside and inside by knowing what's true and what are my strengths as an organization.
I see. Okay, so that it means that if you want to implement the employer branding, there are so many elements that we need to consider, right? Or maybe I call it like touch points that we need to consider for that. Maybe you can share with us what are the touch points that we need to consider when it comes to implement the employer branding stuff.
Okay. Before I share the touch points, I'll share my slides so it's easier for us to see. Before I share, right, I'd like to do a quick poll. So can you just type quickly into the chat itself? What do you guys think, right? The different touch points or different people that's involved in employer branding. So these are people or touch points that can affect your employer brand itself. I'd love to hear about. So just name as many as you can think of. Yeah. So I'll give you one example, right? First would be probably your recruiter, right? Your recruiter is the first person dealing with external parties, so that could be one person. So who else besides a recruiter are people or touch points where they affect your employer brand? So I'd love to hear from the audience itself. Maybe just a quick one. Take about 1 minute to just type whatever comes to mind. Candidates, okay? Thanks for telling me. Thank you.
Nice. Candidates.
Anyone else? Just feel free to type. Don't be shy. I mean, we learn from one another here. So I dropped the hint. Okay, hiring manager. Okay.
I think Utami is a It's a good brand ambassador. Knows about the detail of the touch point for that.
Nice. Anyone else have any thoughts?
Anyone else?
Everyone seems quite shy, or maybe is everyone having dinner now or something?
It's a dinner time in Indonesia, I guess.
Yeah. Everyone in the organization. Thanks, Sikwang. Thanks a lot. Thanks for sharing.
Hi, Sikwang.
Salesperson, Mega, that's a good one. Salesperson.
Frontline salesperson, nice.
Frontline employee, yeah, that's a good one. Okay, let me just share, right? My slide, just let me quickly share here then. Okay, let me see. Okay, so these are some of the touch points, right, that we can consider. I think some of you guys already mentioned some of them. Let me just briefly take you through some of the key touch points. The first one is then your leadership team, right? Because your leadership team is typically the one that's being featured the most, both internally when they do employee comms, or externally when they interview, when they go for conferences, whatever it is, right? That's probably one of the first group that people see the most. So the leadership team is one very important touch point in terms of the employer brand itself. Customers, I think some of you mentioned sales reps. So sales rep, customers, I think that's a very important point. Why, right? Because very often one misconception is that people see employer brand and the commercial brand as two separate things, right? But what in reality is that commercial brand and employer brand is actually interlinked. I'll give you a very simple example. Gojek, right? You guys are familiar with Gojek, right? Gojek, if it's a very good good commercial entity, for example, they provide good service, they give you all the convenience that you have, for example, the likelihood is you might think of them as a good employer. So there's a good chance you might consider them as an employer, right? And likewise, if they're a good employer, chances are if they have any product or service, you might want to give them a chance to try out if it's the very first time, for example, because of that feel-good factor, because of the emotional connection. So hence, this is a very important point where if you have good customer relations, right, which is a frontline stuff in some sense, right, it actually helps to also build an employer brand in some sense because people resonate and feel good about your brand as a whole, okay? The next point is then, of course, social media, both online and offline platforms, for example, where we talk about your content and stuff, where typically this is where digital marketing firm comes into play. We talk about employee stories, the features, we talk about your website, talk about videos, for example. All these are things that can articulate, right, what your value system is, what your culture is like, you know, how your people are like and stuff like that. Third-party partners and institutions include things like your headhunters. So as HR, we know sometimes we engage external headhunters, recruiters, and don't think of your headhunters, right, as just purely an external partner where they just source for you. Think of them as your brand ambassadors, where actually, right, you should not be selling them a role. You should be actually selling them or giving them your company's story itself. Because imagine this, if you have 20 headhunters selling your story instead of selling a position, how powerful can that be for your brand, whether or not people apply for your company? So think of partners like that, or even schools, institutions, for example, as a very good partner or ambassador, right, in some sense, to actually tell your story to more people so that people connect with you at an emotional level. Then, of course, external candidates, where they come for interview, we always talk about the candidate experience, right? Whether they get the job or not, you want them to feel good at the end of it. Which then leads to the next point, your recruiters, your HR. How are you handling that conversation when we do that recruitment process itself, for example? As simple as this, right? When I went for interview once, I sat down, I waited for half an hour, no one came to me. When the interviewers came, I didn't get a glass of water, right? They just go on and on asking me questions. They even give me a chance to really ask something. And when I asked, they kind of brushed me off. Imagine this. Would you have even said yes if they decide to offer you the job? Chances are no, right? Because the experience was so bad, and that touch point itself, right? They did not do a good job connecting with you as a candidate, external candidate itself. So that's another point to think about. And of course, HR team internally. How do you sell constantly within a message at different touch points or different opportunities? Let's say your town hall, let's say your performance management sessions, let's say your engagement activities, let's say your offboarding meeting itself or onboarding event. What kind of message do you bring across? How do you engage people? What kind of experience do you create? That is another important touch point to create that employer brand itself. The next 2 points is then your current and ex-employees, right? In particular, your ex-employees. So I always say this, right? Do you want your employees or ex-employees to live as an advocate, or do you want them to live as a disgruntled employee, right? So after leaving my company, do I constantly say good things or bad things about them, essentially? So that's something to think about from a touch point perspective. Finally, something that we might underestimate is the family members, right? Our wives, our husbands, our kids, our parents, these are people who actually make a lot of impact or influence, right? In terms of how long we stay in a company sometimes, whether we want to try something new and stuff like that. This is actually a very powerful group of people that we often not think about from HR point of view, but that is why, certain companies have things like family day, right? Isn't it? Bring family together to see the office, to check out who your bosses are, to make them feel good, because that actually makes a difference. So before I end this part, let me share a quick story, right? If I may, Benny. I guess some of you might be familiar, Alibaba, Jack Ma, right? So what happened was, many years ago, what happened was this, Jack Ma, he invited Howard Schultz from Starbucks, I think the current chairman of Starbucks, Howard Schultz, to do a keynote speech in China itself. So when Howard, he came to that room, that theater itself, right? I think there were about hundreds of people. He was a bit shocked, right? So he was like, he asked Jack, like, Jack, are you sure these are your employees? So Jack asked, like, why do you say so? And Howard said this. He said, they look a little bit too old to be your employees, right? So who are these people actually? Why do you invite me to speak with them? So Jack Ma said this, you're right, they're not our employees. They're actually the parents of my employees. So his point is this, he wanted people to inspire the family members of the Chinese people, right? His employees itself, because he realized that the parents have a huge influence over the hiring, the retention, the engagement part of, the employees themselves. And hence, he made special effort to constantly engage not only the employees, but the influencers, which include the family members. So hopefully this gives you a quick sense of where are the different touch points that we can build employer branding. And it's not just external, it's not just about employee engagement with your employees. So hopefully that's a good start for you guys. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for sharing that, especially the story from the Jack Ma. I guess everyone hears it's a new story, at least for me. And then maybe it will like trigger us to do another town hall, not only for the employee, but the family town hall, looking at this current condition, because we have to do in online, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So Sam, I have a quick question here regarding the touch point you shared just now, right? So there are like some elements over there, right? I think there are about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 elements.
8, pretty much, yeah.
Right. So is there any is the touch point will be like a clockwise by priority, or it's depend into the organization's situation? If you want to start this.
Sure. So I would say that there's no so-called top priority per se, right? Obviously, I think when it comes to employee engagement, you want to target employees first. Externally, you want to go direct, right, to the candidates themselves. I think that's the most direct, if you ask me in terms of priority. But I would say that there's no specific which is more important. I would say it's a holistic impact, which is what point that Sitcom mentioned, this, my friend Sitcom mentioned, in terms of, everyone matters, right? Both internally and externally. The point is, not everyone at the different touch points will provide the same impact for our different contexts itself, right? For some of us who are very close with, let's say, our recruiters, that could be a very important touch point for us to work with. For some of us who have very strong relationship with the campus, the institutions, the universities, for example, that could be a very powerful touch points. For those who have very close connection, let's say family members, right? That could be a powerful touch point. So I would say for a start, right, internal employees and external candidates, this is the most direct group, definitely, because that's what we're trying to engage and attract in that sense. But beyond that, the other part of it is then, which leverage point can we touch on straight away, which is the high leverage or low hanging fruit that we can work on quite quickly, given our resource, given our context, given the people we want to attract and engage. So this is something for us to think about.
Okay. So I think my next question is about what kind of activities that you may suggest to us, that maybe is a powerful activities to do the employer branding, and how are we going to measure the success of the employer branding activities itself. I'm actually asking this question because I got the question also coming from one of the participants.
Sure.
So my question's more to the activities, but somehow there is a questions coming from the participant asking on how to measure
yeah.
the success of the program itself. Pardon me, the questions is already straight to the point. It's actually my team actually asking the question.
No problem. Happy to share. So two parts of the question, right? So what are some activities, some examples? One is the measurement. So I'll take the measurement later. I'll do the activities first, right? Off my mind, I think one of the most powerful activity that I constantly work on with clients in the market, and increasingly popular as well in the region, is actually having your own employee or rather brand ambassador program. So brand ambassador program basically means, right, you select a pool of employees internally and work with them to leverage on their personal brand, their network, to tell their story that eventually builds up to your company brand itself, right? So that's one of the most powerful activity or initiative in that sense that I can share with you to think of. So most people might think of employer branding straight away, like I said, digital marketing, which they think, oh, I need to hire an agency or consultant to help me to create some content to blast on social media, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's Facebook, whatever it is, right? But I think to me, the most powerful at this moment, based on what I'm seeing, is brand ambassadors. Why, right? First and foremost, think about this. From a company perspective, if I'm HR, I'm responsible for employer branding, for example, right? How many people do I know? How much resources do I have? It's limited. But if I can mobilize 20 employees, for example, imagine even if just each employee has, let's say, 1,000 connections. How many connections can we reach out to, right? That would be 20,000 easily. And with that 20,000, how many more people can they reach out from there? Second degree, third degree, fourth degree, for example, right? So that's why we want to think of how can we work with brand ambassadors to do it, to kind of widen the outreach with limited resources. So that's really powerful in that sense. That's the first thing. Second thing is then this, right? We all know that we have so much information today's day and age, and we can access information so easily with a touch of a button with Google, so on and so forth. So we become more skeptical these days, right? What we see on websites, what we see from HR or corporate comms, we may not trust 100%. But if it comes from an employee saying, okay, this is my experience, this is what I believe in, this is what I didn't resonate with, it's so much more powerful because of the authenticity. It becomes very real, right? And hence, this is a very powerful voice that you want to create. It's not just one, like I said, you want to build pools and different groups of brand ambassadors to then help you articulate what is your employer brand. So for example, maybe one of my clients, they have a few, let's say employer EVP, employee value proposition pillars, right? For example, one is entrepreneurship, one is, let's say, teamwork, one is, let's say, creativity, for example. So using all these pillars, your brand ambassadors will be the ones. Hi. Hi. Sorry. So is that Inda? I heard someone speaking.
Yeah, you can just continue. I guess it was unmute.
Okay. No worries. So I was saying brand ambassadors, right? Yeah. So what you need to do is to then provide them, right? What is the pillar, for example? So let's say I have 3 pillars, right? That's where your ambassadors can then start saying, okay, which one do I resonate with, right? Back to the first point, to look inwards first. So for example, Ambassador Benny, he resonates a lot with the entrepreneurship culture within the company itself. So Benny could be constantly talking about, oh, you know, I believe in the entrepreneurship culture because of this. I was given the chance to kind of start my own side business in the company. So it becomes a very powerful testimonial, right, about the entrepreneurship culture in the company. Then perhaps myself, I might resonate a lot with the creative culture, for example. So I said, oh, the company constantly provides us with resources to be creative, to give us a risk-free or low-risk kind of environment to do so, blah, 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 right? So using your employees and working very closely with them as a voice, as a leverage point in some sense, is very, very powerful. And to me, that is one of the things that I feel, right, in fact, is a must. You know, if you want to go employer branding journey, one of the most important activity to embark on. The next one is then, of course, the social media bit. I think something that increasingly, especially because now, right, all of us are trapped at home. We can't really go out typically. So most people will then look for information online, whether or not they're looking or even pushing out information online. So the social media piece actually becomes even more important in today's day compared to the past, where you have campus engagement, you can invite people for office tours, so on and so forth. Hence, you want to think about what kind of content can you create. But content, right, is no longer just about, you know, a one-way kind of boring content where, oh, I just talk about my employee, the success of this employee or this leader and stuff like that. People want to also know what's happening behind the scenes. That's one. People want to have some engagements like this, for example, which is why one of the things that I encourage my clients to do is then think of how can you do a more dynamic way. For example, live chats. So Benny is probably familiar with me. I do a lot of live chats on Facebook, for example. You can also in your own company, right, create live chat series, right? HR or comms or whoever it is, right? Or your young talent, for example, can be a host. You can every week can invite like one management personnel, one frontline staff, have a good mix of people to interview them, to have a chat, to just showcase, you know, what's the culture all about? You know, who are your people in the company? How are they like? Are they likable? Do they walk the talk and stuff like that? So these are some simple activities that I can share. The brand ambassador program, content creation through things like live chats, for example, which is getting more popular these days, to engage not just the external people, but internal, right? So let me just add on quickly, the brand ambassador, right? Not only are you working with them to advocate what's outside, but imagine this, if they constantly see results with what they're sharing externally, imagine how proud can people like Benny and myself feel if we're representing a company, and that improves the engagement level as well, right? And people in the company will then start wondering, hey, why am I seeing so much stuff on social media? Why is this Benny? Why is this Sam talking so much about the company outside? I'm curious to find out more, and I'll be curious to say, how do I join this program? Because it seems really interesting, right? So once again, you know, these are some activities you can think about, but the point is employer branding is not just external, it's not just social media, but it's also internal, it's also offline. So hopefully that answers the first question in terms of activities, right? Benny, any question for that? Is that okay?
Yeah. So if I may put in the point, like the activities first, I think you have to create kind of a storytelling, right? Right. So then you can create storytelling and then brand ambassadors, either natural brand ambassadors, or maybe you can create a pool of brand ambassadors, which maybe technically when they do posting in the social media, they have to use specific hashtag and so on in order to notice that this is our ambassadors, because in the end, brand ambassador is somehow, it will create more belief to the externals. What happened to the company is more authentic rather than the people from HR to convey, or maybe the marketing team, right? And yeah, that's what I got. I think, and then the rest, I think more to the publications, and I guess you need to create some kind of partnerships with the external also to start doing the employer branding. I'm actually very interested with the storytelling, right? So if you want to create a storytelling, I think it requires specific skills on how to create a good story, because I mean, not everybody is a good storyteller here. It's going to be it's a tough skill actually to create a story. I mean, create story is one thing, but to make the story is actually interesting. I mean, interesting story, and then makes people like willing to pay more attention to read or to view your story itself. So maybe you can share with us what are the key elements that we need to consider when we have to create a good story, when we have to do storytelling, which maybe we can teach our brand ambassadors on how to create a good storytelling itself.
Okay, maybe Benny, before I talk about storytelling, maybe I'll just go back to the previous question in terms of measurements, right? I think somebody asked about how do you measure success, right? Maybe I take that quickly first. So thanks for that question. So I would say in terms of measurements, I would say we have external, internal measurements, right? Because like I said, employer branding, a very good one is holistic. We're looking not just about hiring, it's also about internal engagement, for example. So externally, I would think employer branding is a tool to help you reduce actually your hiring costs, right? Why? If you have a very strong brand that attracts the right people, not just people, but the right people, chances are you have to spend less on advertising eventually, right? You have to spend less in terms of the hiring process, in terms of number of mandates, for example. There's a lower chance of you hiring a bad hire that creates turnover and having to rehire. So essentially your cost from a hiring perspective should decrease over time if your employer branding is strong. So that's one very good measurement, I would say, beyond, of course, the typical social media metric where we talk about followership, people saying good things about you, so on and so forth. So that's probably one important metric in terms of cost perspective that we should definitely present to our management in terms of the lowering cost over time. Internally, I would say what the most powerful thing is then your net promoter score, right? How willing are your employees to advocate and recommend the role, the company to somebody else, right? Do they feel proud, like I said? Because if you have a strong brand that is not only attractive to external people, but people internally also resonate with, that's where people are very comfortable saying, hey, this is the company that I believe in, this is where you should join us, and I strongly want to invite you to apply for our company, for example. So net promoter score will probably be another good one to think about. And of course, I would say the retention rate will be another good indicator, right? If you have a strong brand, a strong engagement scheme, a strong culture because of that, people tend to want to stay for a longer time and they're more engaged because they believe and resonate with what you're doing essentially. So this is some simple matrix that hopefully answers your question. So let me quickly move on then to storytelling. Let me just share my slides one more time so at least it's easier for you to visualize as well.
This is part of the employer branding of Story of Asia. How you explain.
Yeah. Tell a story. Have your logos. Logos is also a good way to constantly remind people of your brand as well. Okay, so jokes aside, right? How do we talk about good stories? So I think to Benny's point, I think Benny mentioned a very good point. It's not easy to tell good stories. So all of us can tell stories. Every day we meet different people with our own stories, everything is happening. But telling a good story, right, is something that can connect with people emotionally. I think that's one of the most important things. And then a story actually conveys a message that creates action. I think that's very powerful. It's something for us to think about. So let me just share what are some key elements, right, if we want to think of a good story. So first, you start off before you write a story or create a story, think of what is my key message? What's the purpose of this story? Right? You don't just tell a story because you want to tell a story. People are like, oh, okay, but like, what are you trying to tell me, right? So think of what's the key objective. Is it that you want to tell them, hey, we are a good employer? Is it that you're trying to tell them that we have a very good culture? Are you trying to tell them that, hey, check our website out? What is it that you want to tell them? What's the purpose behind this story? So that's the very first step, right, that you want to think about when it comes to creating stories. Next is then every good story, right, invokes emotions, right? So it can be making them feel inspired. It can be making people feel sad. It can be making people feel happy, frustrated, whatever it is, right? So you want to create a bit of emotional connection with the audience so that they feel the story and not just say, okay, it's a nice story, but so what? But I want to constantly remember, I want to think about it. I mean, that's a very cliche saying, right? Facts tell, but stories sell, right? Facts tell, but stories sell. Why do facts only tell? Because people don't connect with it. Stories sell because at an emotional level, I feel that story itself. So hence, with whatever fact you have, incorporate some kind of emotions if you can, and that will connect people at a deeper level, right? Next is then the ups and downs. In every single story, usually there's a very good up and down. I'll give you a simple example. For example, like this year when COVID hit, right? My business was badly hit. Like income dropped to almost zero because clients had to pull back the budget and stuff like that. But then we picked ourselves up, we reinvented ourselves, find different ways, to kind of pull the resources together and find different needs in the market. And within 2 months, we picked ourselves up and slowly the business went up again. And now, things are getting better. We found new opportunities. A simple up and down story, for example, like this, will get people interested because they get the kind of roller coaster mood. It's not like, oh yeah, it's so streamlined. I know what's happening next, and it's so boring, basically, right? So every good story have a bit of ups and downs so that you connect at it once again emotionally, all right? And very importantly is this: every story typically has a protagonist, which is like the good guy or the good character in a sense, and the protagonist, which is the villain of the story itself. So like Star Wars, for example, you have your Luke Skywalker versus Darth Vader. I know Benny's favorite, basically, and the Stormtroopers, whatever it is, right? But in some stories, right, there may not be actually a bad guy in that sense, right? So there may not be a Darth Vader. It could be Luke Skywalker versus the situation. So the situation could be the antagonist, which is the bad guy. So in my story just now, for example, I could be the protagonist, Sam. Antagonist could be COVID, for example, right? So how did I fight against COVID to overcome the challenge that COVID created for me? And why do we want to have, these characters involved? Because when you have a good guy or good character in the story itself, what happens is typically people want to root for the good guy or the underdog, right? So you feel like, hey, I want the person to win, you know, it's like going through such a tough time. I want to see what's happening next, and I hope that, you know, he or she overcomes this challenge itself. So hence, they become more emotionally invested in the story itself. Next, of course, like I said, you want to have ups and downs, which means that you want to have some kind of surprise element, so that it's not like, oh, I know what's next, what's happening next, but oh, I didn't think about that. You know, that caught me by surprise, and it piques my interest to say, I want to find out more what's happening, right? So that's a very good story element. And finally, like I said, you can talk about so many things, but finally, what is your call to action? You know, do you actually have something that you can get people to do and get them to move out of their seat or move their fingers to do something on the laptop, for example? What is the call to action? So these are some, I would say, pretty basic and elementary kind of points that I think are very important in a good story, right? Your message, emotions, the ups and downs of it, your characters, your surprise element if you can, and a call to action. So these are some elements that you want to have in a good story. Let me share a simple example over here so you can take reference. This is a LinkedIn post that I posted some time back. So I shared a story of myself, right? What happened was I was denied a promotion in my corporate days, in the very early days, for example. So I was complaining about, wow, you know, I did so much, I thought I was so good, and I still didn't get a promotion, right? So I became very disgruntled. But what happened was, fast forward 9 years down the road, which is now, right? When I look back, I feel so grateful about the situation, because if I was promoted so easily without even earning it in some sense, right? I wouldn't have appreciated it. And because of that, it constantly helped me, you know, in the way to prove others wrong, to really want to work harder, and allowed me to build that skill set, the toolkit that got me to where I am today, where I'm so fortunate to be ahead of many of my peers in a sense because of that, the so-called misfortune in some sense. And at the end of it, right, I share a message where I say it's a marathon, not a sprint. And the call to action is then, you know, you have to adjust your mindset and put in the work. So you see a very simple short post like this, a simple story, a core message, call to action, a bit of up and down, a bit of frustration, emotion, having a character, which is myself, versus the company situation itself, as simple as that. So hopefully this is something useful for you to think about in terms of creating stories. Yeah, Benny, back to you.
Thanks, Sam. I think you also shared a good example for this. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, I think one of the things that I like, and I think Sandra and Danny also says the same things about your keyword, fact tells, story sells. Right?
Yep.
Somehow this employer branding is like a marketing. It's not only about how to win the market share, not only to win how to about the wallet share, but I think it's about to win the heart share of
Absolutely.
the people, right?
Absolutely.
This is the thing that I got from your explanation from here.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, so if I just wondering, if we want to do the employer branding, do we need to do audit for company? And then is all the companies really need employer branding or not? I mean, like for example, I get a questions here. Is government also companies need the employer branding, or if B2B, do we need the employer brand or not? Or is it subject to the employer brand audit itself if we have to do the audit?
Okay, so I think So I think the first answer to everybody is a straight yes. I think there's no it depends. To me, it's a straight yes, right? Everyone needs a good employer brand. Okay, so why, right? Whether or not you're hiring, right? Like Benny said, you want to win not just the mind share, but also the heart share in some sense. You want people outside to constantly say good things about your company, because when you're trying to hire eventually, it's not an overnight thing. They're trying to build a brand or to hire somebody. But imagine if you take years and years to build a very strong employer brand. When the need arises to hire, whether you're from government agency, whether you're from the public sector, private sector, whatever it is, that's where your employer brand shines. And in particular, I would say government sector, I think it's a very good point. At least in Singapore, right, we have a mindset that government sector or public sector is usually a bit more, the misperception or the stereotype is that it's restrictive, it's very hierarchical, it's kind of very stifling to some extent, right? And very slow in some sense. So it may or may not be true for some government bodies, some ministries, some agencies, for example. Hence, that's why employer branding is important, because if you have a good employer brand that stands out for, let's say, your ministry itself, That's why I can tell people, hey, how is my Ministry of Manpower different from the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Labor, for example, or Ministry of Law, for example. The employer brand itself, right, is something that helps you to tell what you truly stand for and what, how are you different in a good way, obviously, from your peers. So even within the government sector itself, or state board, whatever it is, there are different ministries, different divisions, and each of them can actually stand out in a different way. So that's one point. Internally, for those who are not hiring even, you want your employees to all feel proud of the company, isn't it, right? I mean, regardless whether you're a government body, whether you're B2B, B2C, turnover is a real problem. Retention is a real problem in that sense. So how do you constantly make people feel proud about, being part of this company itself and wanting to stay, wanting to say good things about company? That's where your employer brand becomes very important. So I would say yes, a straight yes, that employer branding is important regardless whether you're hiring or not, whether you're B2B, government, private sector, whatever it is. So that's the first part. I think the second part to Benny's question is then the audit, right? So let me share my slide once again. I think it's easier for you guys to see this since I prepared it already. So typically, right, what I focus on when it comes to employer branding, right, is that you want to have a simple audit. And this is a very simple 5C audit that I use as a framework. You guys can just check it out as well, to audit whether or not your brand is in a good position. Let me explain the 5Cs. Clarity. First and foremost, is your EVP, your brand clear enough, right? Do people know what you stand for? So for example, if I ask, let's say Danny, for example, what do you think of, let's say Google? If Danny says something, and let's say Inda says something else, let's say Benny says something else, then I'll be quite worried because there's no clarity. There's in fact confusion about what the brand is all about. So do people say things consistently about brand in terms of that clarity? Are they clear? That's the first thing, right? So that's clarity. Second part is then coherence. Coherence means, right, do what you say, whether internal or externally, right? Does it make sense? Does it make sense to people, right? One moment you could be saying something, next moment you're saying something else, does it make sense to them? Does it tie in together? So your brand has to have that coherence in terms of that messaging, for example. The third point is then, right, completeness. So just like for example, your resume, right? You don't want to have a resume that has certain gaps. Like for example, you have a 2-year gap where your recruiter will think, hey, like why are you hiding something? Why is there a 2-year gap? Likewise for your brand itself, your employer brand, you want to create that transparency so that people who are viewing your brand or like at the different touch points itself, right, don't doubt and have full trust in your brand itself. So that's very important, having the completeness in your brand. The fourth point, which I briefly touched on, is then consistency. So besides being clear, right, at different touch points over time, are you consistent in terms of what you're telling the market? Are you consistent in terms of what you're telling your employees, right? So when I say consistent, it's not about talking about the same thing over and over again, but it's something within the same theme, right? So for example, if I'm constantly talking about we have a strong entrepreneurship culture, it doesn't mean that I'm always talking about the same example. I can be talking about different examples, but it goes back to tell you that we have a strong entrepreneurship culture internally. So that's consistency. Finally, connection. To me, this is probably one of the most important C's, right, amongst the audit, the 5C audit itself, which is, do your target audience, your stakeholders, external, internal, actually connect with your brand, right? Do they feel that this is a brand that I like? Do they like your brand? Do they feel like this is something I'm proud of? Do they feel like this is something I want to be part of? So these are the 5 C's that usually I start off with when it comes to a simple brand audit, to do interviews, to kind of look at the different touch points to see, do you have these 5 C's? Of course, not everyone has all, but then once you know the gap, like I mentioned at the start, how do you then close the gap? So that's a very simple way to perhaps get started with a very simple brand audit as well. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Sam. Okay. Let me also share with you. There is one questions coming here
Sure.
before I ask my questions. How to, because you mentioned about employee value proposition. This question's coming from Sultan Aulia. Sultan asks, when should we do a review of our employee value propositions? Right. But then my questions is here is, you mentioned the example about the EVP, right? Yep. Somehow it looks like the company values. Does it mean company values is equal with the EVP?
Okay.
of the pillar of the EVP? That's the two
maybe
question.
I'll answer Benny's question first, because I think that one leads to the next part itself. So does values equals to EVP? EVP is employee value proposition, right? The answer is, I would say there is overlap, but it's not exactly your values, right? So I think values, right, from a very, if I go from a definition standpoint, is more in terms of what we believe in, what's important to the company, right? I think that's the value system itself. The EVP, on the other hand, right, is actually what is your promise to your employees. So meaning, if today I decide to join Oyo, for example, right, Benny, tell me this is the EVP, then I'll fall back on EVP and say, this is what Oyo is promising me, and this is what I want to, I will be expecting, basically. So the value is then, this is what all of us should have in terms of how should we behave, how should we, or what is important to the company culture itself. But the EVP is then, what do I expect as an employee? Because this is what you promised me when I first joined the company itself. So I think that's the slight distinction that we need to think about when it comes to EVP versus values.
Okay. Okay, so when do we review then? Do we have any kind of specific period, like periodically we have to review the EVP itself, or how?
I would say it's good to review periodically, but I think when you get a very good indication, right, that the EVP is probably a bit outdated, you can probably think of it from two perspectives. One is from a hiring perspective. If you're constantly getting the wrong hires in, so meaning your EVP is talking about, for example, we are creative culture, we value people first, but you're hiring people that, let's say, are very task oriented, people who believe in just structure and inhibit creativity, for example. That is something wrong already. I think I'll be quite worried in terms of EVP, what are we selling to people? Because the culture probably shifted a little bit. And that's where when we go external at different touch points, when recruiters are hiring managers are hiring, they are probably trying to look for people of different nature that is quite different from your EVP already. So I think that's probably one indication that you need to change or review your EVP. That's one. Internally, if we are constantly seeing that, even though I might be saying, let's say, creativity and let's say people-centricness, but constantly internally, I'm seeing that through feedback that people are complaining about, my manager doesn't engage me. I don't have opportunities to highlight or share my ideas, for example. I feel like I'm just following instructions all the time. That's also another indication from internal point of view to say, my EVP seems outdated, right? I need to relook at it, even though this is ideal, but it seems like the ideal is no longer a reality. So I think that's probably some points. I think to Sundar's question, thanks for the question, by the way, Sundar, that you want to start thinking, when should I do the audit itself? But if you just want to do a random audit, right, start by talking to a few employees to ask them, hey, do you know what's my EVP, right? And ask them, what do you think about EVP itself? So I think that's where you can quickly understand whether or not EVP is still solid or need to make it change itself.
I see. Okay. Okay, so wow, it's already 1 hour we discussed about it. I just like time flies very fast. I think I really enjoy the discussion here. I believe everyone also enjoy the discussion here. So let me try to open a forum here. If anyone would like to ask directly with you, right? I mean, it's okay for you, right?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Go ahead. Anyone would like to ask question, you can unmute, then you can just ask directly to Sam here. We still have another like 15 minutes to go before we wrap up the session. Or you can also raise your hands, then we can unmute your mic here. Anyone?
If you're shy, just type in the chat box, it's fine. Whichever way works for you guys. Yeah.
Yeah, chat is okay also if you want. I think a bit shy.
So as always, when I work with my Indonesian friends, they're always very shy, but actually I know they have a lot of good ideas in their mind. That's the thing, it's how you get them to talk, right? Most of the time, yeah. You guys are always very shy. Okay, we have a question here actually. So Yuri, thanks for the question. So keep the questions coming, I think that's very cool. Yuri's asking how to convince management that we need to do something with the employer branding. Good question. I think that's very important, right? How do you convince? Because management is the one that allocate your budget and the one that sponsors or supports your initiative. I think very importantly, right, first and foremost, like I said, don't treat employer branding as a HR initiative. I think that's the first thing you want to think about, right? Because whenever we go to management and say, oh, we need to think from a HR perspective and do HR stuff, they switch off straight away. I think the challenge is they feel that HR is just a HR problem. It's not my problem. It's not a business problem, right? So how do you think of employer branding tying into the business outcomes? I think that's the first thing I think about to convince the management. For example, like I shared, employer brand is closely connected with the commercial brand, right? So think of how can we create a strong employer brand so that customers or candidates will be more likely to support our business, in particular the B2C business itself. I think that's the quickest win in some sense. That's one thing to think about. Next is then from a dollar cent perspective, right? Like I said, if your employer brand, I think to the question I think someone asked about the matrix itself, if my employer brand is strong, over time, I will definitely reduce my recruitment costs. I will definitely reduce my retention costs. And that's something that you want to reduce because from the P&L perspective, that makes sense to my management. So if I invest, let's say $20,000 US, right, in let's say my employer branding, I can save up to maybe $500,000 US over the next 2 years. Imagine how powerful is that for your management? Will they invest in that? Pretty sure they will, right? So these are some ways simply from a numbers perspective, and from a big picture connecting the commercial perspective that you can think of to share with your management to get started, this conversation itself. Hopefully that answers your question, Yuri.
Is that answer your questions, Yuri?
Welcome.
Yes. Thanks, Sam. Any more questions? Somebody unmute, maybe would like to ask. We are a good listener here, Sam.
Maybe since everyone is so quiet, right? Let's do this. Can I get every single one? Right? I like to do this in my workshops actually, just to type one key takeaway from today's session. Every single one. So I should have about 60 responses, 63 responses, right? Just one takeaway. What is something that you remember from today's sharing session? So that will give us, me and Benny, a good sense of, whether it was effective or not for our sharing today. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, you can put in the chat, yeah.
Okay, while you're typing, let me just answer Dinda's question.
There is another question coming, Sam, from Dinda Rapsodia.
So she's asking how to manage
employer brand through the coronavirus. I think Dinda knows what I'm going to ask. So then Dinda asked almost the same questions.
So is Dinda from your company?
No, it's not. I think I just know Dinda here.
Okay, thanks Dinda for the question. So yes, I think in current times, right, employer branding, I think, has shifted focus to some extent. For the very reason, at this time, I would say most people are not exactly hiring, at least for most companies. Most people are just thinking about how can I build for the future? So actually now, in terms of employer branding, it's really thinking about creating a good engagement internally, where you help your employees to feel safe, to feel that you care about them. I think that's the most important thing at this moment. And then building that loyalty over time in such times, so that when times turn for the better, right, employees have that loyalty that they want to stay with you for the longer term. So that's one part of it in terms of how can you build your employer brand in the current coronavirus situation. Externally, right, it's actually the best time when most people are not thinking about employer brand or hiring, to work with your stakeholders, to constantly create a top of mind with your potential candidates. So maybe you're not hiring accountants now, you're not hiring tech people now, but in the next 2 years or 1 year when things get better, business is growing, these are the main group you're working with. This is the best time actually to work with them to create that relationship, right? The last thing you want from a recruitment perspective, hiring perspective is a transaction where, it's just about perks, it's just about, what's in it for me, but you want to build a relationship. And like Benny mentioned, the heart connection, the hardware itself. And this is the best time when nobody's really thinking about hiring, to create that connection itself. So once things get better, once the need arises, imagine this, you will be the first person or first company they think of, and you get a higher chance in terms of the priority list itself for them to accept an offer or even apply for you in that sense. So in such times, I would say employer branding from an internal perspective is really about communicating that care, the empathy to create that assurance. I think that's the first thing. Externally, it's about constantly creating the mind share, the heart share, whatever we call it, to make people feel good about your brand, to constantly remind them that, hey, I'm there, and think about me when the need arises. So Hopefully that answers Dinda's question. Yeah.
Thank you, Sam. Dinda, is it answered the questions?
Yes, Dinda, thank you.
So Sam, I have something in my mind. I mean, whenever we talk about the employer branding,
yep,
we always talk about the social media, and then when I involved in the employer branding project before, and even like in the past, when it comes to the social media, we always talk about what is the hashtag, what is the good hashtag to make people like notice that this is our company, this is how we do it, and this is why you have to join. I mean, this hashtag somehow is become like something critical from my experience. I mean, I need to know your opinion. Does the hashtag in the social media really affect on how you do the employer branding, or is it just like element that not really affect? I mean, it's so impactful.
So let me just explain this, right? For those who are not exactly familiar with hashtagging, it's actually kind of like a tag, right? So for example, if I have a book, right, I put a tag there so that I know if I want to look for something related to employer brand, I flip to that page, for example. So hashtag has that similar effect. So for instance, right, if I'm targeting people who are interested in finance, let's say I'm hiring finance people, I want finance people to see my post, I could be hashtagging, let's say hashtag finance or financial planning or future of finance, for example, right? Because I know that this is a popular hashtag amongst my target audience, which is the finance people in this case. So to Benny's point, I would say hashtag is important to some extent, right? Where first and foremost, before you talk about hashtagging, is first and foremost, you want to think of who's my target audience. Am I targeting my employer branding to tech people, for example? So maybe I want to hashtag technology where they search for technology stuff so that it kind of pops up, right? In the technology feed, for instance. Because what happened is some people actually follow hashtags where they might click on hashtag to just read news or posts related to specific tags in that sense. So that could be one way. So you want to think of first and foremost before the hashtag that you use is that who is my target audience? And then within the target audience itself, you want to find out which are the popular hashtags that's the most followers, right? Because it's not about having so many hashtags. I mean, you can have 10 hashtags, but none of them are popular or none of them have people following, that doesn't make sense. But if you have one or two that's powerful, that you know it goes straight to your target audience, that's what you want to do. So hopefully that answers the social media bit of hashtagging.
Got it. So you know about key opinion leaders, right?
Yes.
Okay. Before I ask them, before I ask about the key opinion leaders, let me allow Mega Nirmala Sari, who already raised the hand to ask the questions. Mega, you may ask questions to Sam directly. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Hi, Sam.
Hi, Mega.
Yeah. How are you?
I'm good. How about you?
Okay, I'm fine. I'm good. I'm great. Okay. Actually, your topic is very attract me. Because employer branding is a very I don't know. It's a important thing that every employer have to do, right? But me myself, I've never done any of employer branding project. Okay, so I think if I were given this employer branding project, right? What do you suggest as the first action I have to do to make my very first project employer branding is knockout and will attract top candidate to my employer.
Okay. Thanks for the question, Mega. I think the first thing I think the first thing you want to think of is you want to hire Sam. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, just kidding. Just kidding. Yeah. So I think the first thing, like I shared just now, I think very importantly is then you want to look inside first, right? What is the strength of your organization? So maybe Mega, a quick question to you then, right? If I were to ask you now, if you to ask any employee, right, what would be something that they say that they like about the company itself? Anything you can share with me briefly?
Okay, my company, right? At the moment, is it?
Yep.
Okay. For my point of view, my employer have a great great insight or a great value to Indonesia.
Okay.
That's what attract me to join the company actually.
Okay, so that's the bigger purpose, right? So you're saying that the nature of the company, what they do, creates a very strong sense of purpose. So I think that's a very powerful point, right? So that's something that you can probably think of, how do I start there? So once you're able to collect a series of things to understand what my company is strong at, right? Then you can build what we call the employee value proposition for a start. So it starts from an audit, like I mentioned, the 5C that I mentioned briefly, to understand what you have, right? And then use that as a way to kind of create content across different touch points or in the messaging with your different stakeholders. So for example, if you tell me that this is a very powerful point that attracted you and potentially attracted a lot of other candidates or rather current employees in a sense, I want to make sure that my recruiters outside and in the company saying the same thing, and the focus is on this point in terms of the value my company brings to the society or to Indonesia. So I think that's something to think about. And within the company, you also want to think about how can I, across different touch points, every single opportunity, right, to constantly remind them of why my company is so valuable to the company and why did you join us in the first place. So that's probably the first step I'll think about, beyond hiring me, of course.
Okay, so start from that value, right? Okay. Then what type of form do you think it will be wise for me to start with? Is it through a social media or storytelling maybe? Or
let me ask you a
anything?
simple question, right, Mega?
Okay.
So when I say employee branding, like I briefly mentioned, it's for both internal and external, right? So
Yes.
let me ask you first, internally, you need to think of, where do your people actually get information from, right? How do you get in touch with them? Do they look at your company's social media? Do they read your emails? Is there like a newsletter? Do they have certain activities that they constantly do together, for example? Those are places where you want to put your message in. That's for internal, okay? Externally, who are your candidates that are trying to hire, right? Where are your candidates looking for information? Are they looking through the newspaper? Are they looking at social media, LinkedIn? Is it Facebook? Is it Instagram? Where are they active in? And where can you reach them? That's where you want to put a message in, basically.
Okay. Okay, that's good. I have good insight now. Yeah, that's answer my questions. Thank you, Sam. That's very helpful.
You're welcome,
Thanks so much.
Thank
Sam,
you,
I
Benny.
have a very good questions coming privately to me.
Sure.
I think these questions, I never thought about this question, but I think this is very good question for me. So the case is like this. When we talk about the EVP, right? Every company has their own EVP. But how about if the company is merged? If they do the they do like merge between 2 or 3 companies. When 1, 2, 3 companies, ABC companies already have their own EVP, and then when it comes to merge into one company, how are we going to define the EVP itself? And then I'm just wondering what kind of the easiest that we need to take at the beginning to merge this new EVP from 3 become 1.
Okay, that's an excellent question, and it's not an easy question, to be honest.
Yeah, I cannot answer, because if you ask me the answer, then it'll be it's for me to know and you to find out.
Can I answer that as well? Okay, so that's a good question. I think it's a very critical question as well. I think first and foremost, I think I'll take a very change management perspective, because I also work a lot on the change management perspective as well. So when it comes to change management, right, when it comes to merger acquisition, typically what happens is if we have 3 different culture, right, we have 3 different entities coming together, we don't try to force one culture on everybody straight away, right? That's what's happening when it comes to merger acquisition. What you want to do is to have a proper transition phase. So typically, what happens from a branding perspective in the initial onset is that we keep it untouched, right? Keep it untouched, meaning you want to keep create that kind of create the stability first, in terms of each of them understanding what's the key proposition, to make them feel like I'm safe, I feel good about the situation first. And then over time, when it comes to transition, because what happens during the transition phase is that you get people to mix around, some people will leave, you get new people to join in, and then relook at what is now the new value proposition, what's the new culture all about, right? So a quick way to answer this is then I'll keep it static first. I'll keep it status quo first. I won't try to force anything because it's not possible to force anything. And if you force anything, typically what happens is that the acquired company will feel like, you know, I'm the quiet person. I don't feel like I'm part of the family. I'm like the forgotten cousin, whatever it is. And that's not going to help your engagement itself, basically. And externally, people will see a different light because people are leaving. People are saying negative things when they leave, for example. So I'll keep it static for now at the very beginning. And once I'm able to kind of transition past where I get people to kind of start socializing with one another, I start getting them to talk and start having some commonalities, right? In terms of them together, for example. That's where I'll start to think of, okay, now I'll think of my new EVP and revamp it a little bit. It can be a totally new EVP. It doesn't have to be the original company's EVP added on or revised. It can be something totally new because now you're merging 3 groups of people together and it could be something very interesting as well. So hopefully that answers the question to some extent.
Got it. So it means the keyword is, I think, not about the keyword, but if I might summarize from the answer, the first steps you have to take when it comes to when it comes to merge, like say 2 to 3 companies, you have to do the internal consolidation first. Right? Yep. Once it is settled, all this internal consolidation, then you can start doing the refine the EVP, then you can start doing the employer branding.
Yep. So basically, it's back to what Benny mentioned, right? Inside out, right? So before you think of what you want to tell people, what kind of story you want to tell, first and foremost, let's ensure that inside, you know, it's stable to some extent. I mean, it's probably not 100% stable, but stable to some extent. You have something to shout out first that people resonate with and it's authentic, and then start talking about your branding itself. Because failing which, you can paint the most beautiful picture, tell the most engaging story, but nobody's going to believe it, both internally and externally. So, yeah.
All right. Okay, Sam, I think we are running out of time. I mean, we are almost reached the time for 90-minute sessions. If you don't mind, you can give like a quick wrap up here about the employer branding, maybe the top 3 things or the top 5 things that we have to remember. We want to do the employer branding itself, and how do we start? And yeah, any tips that you want to share? I think for the next detailed questions, everybody can reach out directly to Sam for that. Or you can directly reach to me as the manager for Indonesia. No, I'm kidding.
My manager is to talk to him first. Okay, so maybe before I share, right, I'll just put my LinkedIn in the group chat itself, so all of you can connect with me. Feel free to ask me any questions from there. I think that'll be the quickest win itself. I'll drop my email later as well. So yes, so I think a few takeaways, right? So I think first and foremost, think of the inside out approach. I think I can't emphasize enough. Inside out is very important. Don't think of employer branding as digital marketing alone, right? Digital marketing is one part of it, social media is one part. But first and foremost, what's happening inside, and then think of what's your strength before you talk about how can you articulate it externally. So I think that's the first thing you want to think about, very important. Second thing is then always start from doing a proper audit. I think that's very important because it's not just from management or HR perspective. You want to also audit, right? From an external point of view, from your employees' point of view, and from different segments of your company itself. Because once you get a proper picture, that's where you know what you can fix. That's where you know what your strengths are. That's where you know what ammunition basically you have that you can use to shout out to the market. So the audit is actually very important, something I can't emphasize enough as well. Next part is then brand ambassadors, right? I think that is something that I personally seen strong results. I work with a lot of clients on this. That's very powerful. And I've seen the energy level of employees themselves, the advocates or ambassadors themselves, get a lot better, and they attracted great talents in that sense. So brand ambassador program is something that I feel all companies should have, right? In one form or another. And obviously, if you can train them to be more savvy, that's even better. For example, public speaking, for example, social media, communication, whatever it is, I think that's very important. So these are 3 things that I think are quite important. Let me see anything else. Storytelling, probably the 4th one is then storytelling, right? How do you not just use facts, right? To say, oh, we are good because of blah, blah, blah. We have this good amount of revenue. We hire these amount of people. We give back to the society. But use stories, use purposeful stories that have characters, to connect at an emotional level, to bridge that gap, with the external and internal stakeholders. So hopefully these 4 points will be useful for you. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's very, very useful. I hope you don't mind to share the slide that you just presented.
Sure, I can share with you. No problem.
The session. I can share to the people in the group. Also, if you don't mind, you can actually join with the OneHR Telegram group. We don't use WhatsApp. Sorry, maybe you still use
no
WhatsApp.
Problem. No problem.
Millennials used Telegram. You know, colonial used WhatsApp.
So let me know. Yeah, how can I join? Just let me know. Yeah.
Sure. So I'm going to share with you the link. Once again, tonight I think this is very insightful.
Thank you.
And thank you very much, Cheng, for coming here online virtually. Hopefully, we can meet physically again. Yeah, after all this COVID. Take a good care of yourself and take a good care for everyone here. Stay in touch and have a nice weekend ahead. Because we are going to have a long weekend here in Indonesia.
Likewise in Singapore also, Friday.
Okay. Got it. Send my regards to your family. I heard the baby is
he's crying.
I think the baby needs you now.
Yeah. So let's stay connected, everybody. I think thank you so much once again. I'd like to thank Benny once again for really facilitating and making this so comfortable. Thank you, Danny, for inviting me. I think really appreciate it. Thanks everyone, for your questions, for your support. So like I mentioned, add me on LinkedIn. Let me just drop my email here as well if you guys need just a quick one. Oops, sorry.
You can join the Telegram group with the OneHR, so then you can also share your email and LinkedIn over there.
Yep,
so then, and anyway, people we make a lot of decision for this. And I think before I close the session, I also would like to say a big thanks to Mbak Meti from the Indonesia Capital Market Institute again for supporting OneHR Indonesia for all the online learning. All right, thank you. Take care. Have a great day ahead.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, Benny.
Thanks, Sandra. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.